All right. Well, good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining Workplace Fairness for our Q&A following the Waging Change virtual screening. And today, I'm proud to say that we have joining us the Peabody Award-winning filmmaker, Abby Ginsberg, who created the film. And we have with us a restaurant worker leader, Chiedza Kundizora, who will be a panelist with us today. And also, we have One Fair Wage president and co-founder Saru Jararaman, who will also be joining us today. So thank you for the three of you for joining us for this Q&A to give us some more context to the film and to tell us more about what is happening in the world of restaurant workers when it comes to unfair wages. And so to start off our Q&A, I do have a question for Abby. And Abby, the first question I have for you is, why did you decide to make this film?
Because I was shocked when I learned from Saru at a speech he gave a number of years ago that there was such a thing as a tip minimum wage that was as low as $2.13. I live in California, and we actually don't have a tip minimum wage. People have to pay restaurant workers and everybody whatever the minimum wage is, and then it's tips on top. So I wasn't living in a state where there was a tip minimum wage, and even if I had, I'm not sure I would have known about it. But I was stunned that in, the mid 2010, so this was probably 2015, to learn that restaurant workers in 17 states at that point were getting paid as a wage $2.13, and they had to get to the minimum wage of $7.25 by adding on the people's tips who had tipped them as customers. And so I like hit the ceiling when I heard that. Right. And as I have said in other places, it's like, and I had that feeling that a filmmaker sometimes have when you realize that maybe your next film has just sort of appeared in front of you. Because I thought, if I don't know this, how many other millions of people don't have any idea that this is the status in this country? And I thought, kind of my service to my fellow customers who go out to restaurants would be to learn more about this, teach myself about it, and then share that much more widely. So that was it was a stunning moment for me. And then, I had to introduce myself to Saru. I had to say, yes, this is the kind of film I want to make. Is that okay with you? Will you give me some access to the people you work with, and so on? So it was not a slam dunk that I would get to make this film, but that I was motivated to happened literally in the 7 to 10 minutes that Saru was talking at that speech. So that was pretty amazing. So anyhow, that's how I got started. And then let me say, again, I wasn't tied into the movement. I know people who were, I used to be a lawyer 1,000 years ago. So I know people who work on employment issues and fair wage issues and so on. But this was a whole new movement that was taking place outside of traditional union organizing. And I needed to kind of get up to speed. So part of what I did was go film various activities that were taking place, by the groups that were protesting, et cetera. And through that, both met my subjects and educated myself in a way that would ultimately lead me to be able to make a film where I felt like I was giving the information I needed to give. So that's how we kind of got to a film.
Thank you, Abby. And what would you say has been the response to the film to date?
Okay, so the film had its kind of world premiere last November 2019 in New York City. It got it had a very enthusiastic set of screenings at something called Doc NYC, which is a film festival. And then our next festival was the Omaha Film Festival, and we did a screening in DC. And then suddenly we were in COVID and we were in lockdown. And quite frankly, I had no idea how the film was going to get out or how any of us were going to be able to pivot to make our films available. And the good news was that both organizations and labor film festivals and other groups that, are engaged in screening films wanted to show the film. And so it has had a rather robust year. Where are we now? It's like it's been 11 months or something. And we've had, a sort of surprising number of people able to see the film, able to be educated by it, interested in it, And right now we're getting ready for a broadcast. So I would say that, the film has been very well received, but to just say one other thing, which is, given how the restaurant industry and restaurant workers were so badly impacted by the pandemic, I felt, and everybody agreed, that I really needed to create a segment on the pandemic and add it to the film before the film went on television. And so what I've been working on for the last 2 to 3 months is getting that right. And so that's, that now the film that will be broadcast on TV discusses what the impact of the pandemic, and we should have that discussion here as well. But anyway, I just felt like I felt a real obligation to try to, figure out a way to talk about how horrible the pandemic has been and how many people have been on food lines and how many people have,
Right.
faced food insecurity for the first time, et cetera, in this industry. And so, things were bad before the pandemic.
Right.
So I think the question is, are there, and this is a question for Saru or Chiesa, but are there things that we've learned during the pandemic that may make things better for us moving forward, so that it's not all bleak? Because I don't think it is all bleak.
Saru or Chiesa, you want to take that?
Yeah, what have we learned?
Sure. So, as you saw from the film, the industry had I like to call it a pre-existing condition prior, to the pandemic. The sub-minimum wage was a source of economic and racial and gender injustice prior to the pandemic, as you saw in the film. With the pandemic, about 6 million workers lost their jobs. About 60% of them could not access unemployment insurance because they were told in most states that their sub-minimum wage was too low to meet the minimum threshold to qualify for benefits. And then when they went back to work in the summer and the fall, we just released a series of reports based on thousands of surveys of workers and found that they were doing more for less. They were now asked to enforce social distancing and mask rules in the location that the CDC has named the most dangerous place to be, which is restaurants. All for a much reduced tip income. Tips are down 50 to 75% because sales are down 50 to 75%. And 90% of workers say their employers are not following safety protocols. 60% say they can't enforce those protocols because they rely on tips from the same customers on whom we want them to enforce these rules. But the worst thing that emerged from the data is that 41% of workers said that sexual harassment went way up during the pandemic, and hundreds of women submitted comments from male customers saying that they were asked by male customers to take off their masks so that men could judge their looks and therefore their tips on that basis. It was so common, we heard it so pervasively that we actually coined a new term. Masculine harassment is what we're calling it, because we heard it so universally across the country from so many thousands of women, which makes these workers the only essential workers, not only to not get a minimum wage, but the only essential workers. Think about all the other essential workers, nurses and grocery store workers and delivery workers. Nobody else is being asked to take off their protective gear to get their income. These are the only essential workers being asked, basically told, kill yourself so I can see you and you can maybe get a tip. All of that did result in change. We heard from literally hundreds of independent restaurant owners who were either moved by the fact that their folks didn't get unemployment insurance, or were moved by the murder of George Floyd to say maybe it is time to get rid of this legacy of slavery in our industry, or frankly, who couldn't get their workers to come back to work without a full minimum wage because workers were making this calculation of, wait a second, you're asking me to come back for very little in tips, a $2 wage, and an extremely hostile, harassing clientele. The clientele changed during the pandemic because regulars, maybe people like us, were not eating out as much because we were worried about the pandemic. The people who are not worried about the pandemic are the ones who are eating out more frequently, and they're much more aggressive, much more hostile, much more harassing, much less concerned about COVID, and don't want to be told to wear a mask or sit 6 feet apart. And so we saw this change. I mean, a lot of workers have told us that they've never faced such a hostile clientele as during this period. And so we We heard from employers that they saw that, they heard that. We heard from a lot of restaurant owners, many of whom, by the way, fought us on this issue in the past. We had restaurant owners who had opposed this issue and during the pandemic came around and signed on to a unity deal saying they agree with one fair wage. So we did see a dramatic change. We saw many restaurant. I'll just give you an example. In the movie, you saw the fight over Initiative 77 in DC. Well, the restaurants that led that fight are now paying one fair wage in DC. The restaurants that funded that fight are now signed on to say they support one fair wage. And that is a sea change. Sadly, the legislators have not followed the workers and employers yet, but the real test is now, because now that the Senate has flipped, Raise the Wage Act will be moving in Congress, and the question is going to come up now. Will tipped workers be excluded once again from the federal minimum wage when it moves through the House and the Senate this year?
So, Sari, what would you say are the prospects of this happening? Like now that we have both houses flipping, to Democrats, or the Democratic administration coming in to the White House, and also, as you mentioned, earlier, a lot of state legislatures hopefully are starting to see the writing on the wall, but more importantly, industry is. I mean, how do you feel today about the prospects of the minimum wage, the sub-minimum wage really changing?
I think the sub-minimum wage will change in some states this year. I think it will change in Michigan because the Michigan Supreme Court just shifted. I think it will change in New York. I think it could change in DC. At the federal level, now that both houses are controlled by Democrats, a $15 minimum wage will absolutely move through both houses. The real question is, will tipped workers be left out in the Senate? And this is why I was late. I apologize because I was leading a big federal strategy session on this very issue. And we are thinking about there are 8 or 9 key senators, the 2 senators in Arizona, the 2 senators in New Hampshire, the 2 senators in Colorado, Joe Manchin in West Virginia, King in Maine, and Heinrich in New Mexico that we're worried about that might give away the tipped workers. And the key question is, can we make them understand that really at this point, this is a which side are you on issue? If you vote to exclude tipped workers, you are for persisting legacies of slavery. You are for racism. You are for sexism. That is what you are voting for when you exclude the tipped workers. There's only one anti-racist bill, and it is the bill that includes these workers that have been excluded since slavery. And if we collectively can let the senators understand that this is now at this point very black and white, either you are anti-racist or a racist. That's it on this issue. That's what we need everybody's help to do. We need your help to call out these senators and say, how dare you roll over once again to the Restaurant Association when we as a nation have decided to move on from slavery, when we as a nation have finally decided to call these workers essential. It's time to not just clap for them, let's pay them.
Yes, thank you, Saru. And before I go to Chiesa, I have a question or two for her. If you have any questions for any participants, please raise your hand, or you can type it into the chat and I'll ask it for you. Okay.
Can I just say one thing on?
Oh, of course, Abby.
I just want to piggyback on something Saru said, which is, one of the things that the film is sort of baseline education. Right. Why these Q&As are so important is that they add to things that are happening. This film was finished the second time before we knew what the results in Georgia were. So it's like, now we need to know. So all those states that Saru just identified, part of the goal of this film or the Q&A behind the film is to help educate all of us as to who those 10, you have to say those names again practically. But maybe one thing that Workplace Fairness can do, Saru can send you the names, and you can do a kind of little bulletin saying, when the time comes and this comes up, here are the people that really need to be approached.
You can start approaching them now.
Yeah, approach them now. But the point is that the real progressives are going to be on the right side of this. They've been on the right side the whole time.
That's
Right.
right.
And you sort of see, at the end of the film, when you see it pass the House and they say, now it's time for the Senate. Well, if the Senate hadn't flipped at all, we would say, okay, it's time for the Senate in 4 more years.
Right.
But given where we are, it could really be time for the Senate this year. And that's going to depend on us.
That's right.
Because the National Restaurant Association, at the same time that we're discussing this, is figuring out their strategy to keep it at 213.
That's
And
right.
so we have some big opposition that we have to overcome.
Yeah. I see Wayne has a question. By the way, Wayne Outen is the president of the board for Workplace Fairness and one of their original co-founders. Wayne? Oh, Wayne, you're on mute.
You're on mute.
Okay, well, sorry, I was a few minutes late as well. I had a client on the other line with a problem. So I just wanted to make 2 observations. One is an avenue that I might be able to help with is the Stand Up for Workers PAC, Political Action Committee, which I was a co-founder of a year and a half ago. And we gave money to numerous senators, some of whom won, including some of the ones that Saru mentioned. And we have a direct relationship with some of those people now because we supported them. And this is exactly the kind of stuff that this PAC was formed to do, help low-wage workers. And so I would volunteer to try to be a nexus for that purpose. Saru.
Wonderful. Can I get your contact information?
Edgar knows how to find me.
Yeah, I'll make a connection.
Okay.
That's great.
And the other thing is that Workplace Fairness as an organization may be constrained because we're not allowed to lobby as a 501c3 organization. We can advocate for things, but where we can't do actual lobbying.
Well, educating senators on why this is an issue would be really great. But I just want to mention one more thing because I don't know if your PAC involved lawyers, but
all lawyers.
Yeah, all lawyers. I thought so. So you probably know that Trump is moving an 11th hour rule change to make on this issue to make it so that restaurants are able to pay the sub-minimum wage even when not doing customer-facing work. So they could be cleaning the bathroom or stocking shelves or frying something in the kitchen and paid the sub-minimum wage. And so they're getting rid of what they call the 80-20 rule in restaurants.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
And so we are suing the administration. But again, it elevates, I think, for these Democratic senators, why this sub-minimum wage should never existed in the first place, because as long as it exists, it creates a perverse incentive for employers to want to pay everybody the lower wage and have them do all the work. When a hedge fund took over Darden, which is the world's largest full-service restaurant company, it's Olive Garden's parent company, they publicly announced in their shareholder document that their plan to make profit was to try to get all the workers on the sub-minimum wage. Even though that was illegal, they were very public about it. And now Darden is working with Trump to try to get rid of this 80-20 rule. The 80-20 rule is a legal rule that's been around for quite a while that basically says if you're going to pay somebody the sub-minimum wage, you are liable as an employer to show us that worker is spending at least 80% of their time doing customer-facing work that would allow them to get tips.
Yeah.
If that rule goes away, again, they could clean bathrooms, they could cook, they could do anything and get a sub-minimum wage. And this is something the companies have been fighting for a long time. And even if Biden comes in and immediately tries to reverse it, it will take a few months, meaning this rule could go into effect before it gets reversed. And it, again, just demonstrates why, honestly, the solution is not just to reverse this rule. It's to just not have a sub-minimum wage at all.
Thank you, Saru. And I want to ask Chiedza some questions. And so, Chiedza, in the time of COVID, how have workers continued to mobilize and to band together to advocate for their rights and advocate for the removal of the sub-minimum wage?
I feel like being faced with unemployment immediately, to wake up and all of a sudden you and everybody you know doesn't have a job. And then the reality of applying for unemployment and realizing that, oh, like what would be based on my income is not actually what I'm getting. And how am I supposed to survive on $300 a month?
Right.
How is that even considered? And that $300 a month, or some, not even that, is based on not adequately compensating the workers to begin with. And I think the cracks were already there. And the foundation was shaky because the foundation was based on exploitation anyway. So when the bottom fell out, we didn't have a choice. Either you're going to figure out how to fight for equity, or you're going to stay on the ground and keep getting kicked. And, you know, I'm lucky to be in California, to have, you know, an actual minimum wage. But even in California, we weren't protected. We weren't guaranteed protections. And so everybody who were doing outdoor dining, or even some doing indoor dining when that was open for a while, were continually putting their lives on the line without actually having very clear-cut guidelines, because you don't know if households are mixing. You don't know, and everybody's got to take off their mask to eat. So every time you're approaching that table, do they have a mask on? Did they put it back on after they took that bite? That's going to be the difference in your potentially your survival. Right. And to say that your actual survival is worth X amount of dollars, your survival, your life being put in jeopardy is worth $2.13 an hour, that would mobilize anybody. You know, for real. Because even making the minimum wage that we make here, is it a living wage? No. Right. Would it be enough to pay rent on an apartment, be able to pay your bills, be able to have food on the table continuously? No. What provided that was our tips. Right. And as Saru said, with tips being down 50 to 75%, that's not an option. So you're actually putting your life on the line for less. So your risk is higher, your payoff is lower. And we're still expected to go and put ourselves and subject ourselves to that situation. It's just untenable. And I think anyone who actually understands the intricacies of these effects would be like, no, I wouldn't do that. Right. You know? And the reality is so many people, because they aren't getting a living wage, don't have a choice. That right. When they applied for unemployment and they didn't get enough, you know, to even partially pay their rent, much less buy food. Like, okay, so I guess I got to coast on this, you know, eviction moratorium and stack up a whole bunch of debt. I got to go to the food bank while I'm applying for food stamps, because there's no protection. And then while all these things are trying to line up, your job says, okay, outdoor dining's opening up again. Come back to work and put your life on the line for pennies on the dollar. There's a lot of people who don't have a choice. And that's why we're here, is for those people, and to say for the restaurant industry to rebuild itself, it needs a strong foundation. It's already, that old foundation is gone. It is fractured. Anybody who's trying to cling to it, it's not going to work. It's not a sustainable business model. And we need a new one.
Thank you for sharing that, Chiedza. And another question I have for you is, you know, with COVID presenting so many challenges, particularly for restaurant workers, have you seen any successes in the way workers have been mobilizing in terms of advocating for their rights? Anything you can tell us that was like, hey, this is what workers have done as a collective, and here are the results. Obviously, with the in mind that, like, obviously the ultimate goal hasn't been reached yet, but anything that we can at least say has been working to date.
I think it's the more people are mobilized and the more pressure that's applied, the more traction that we have to get those successes down the line. And so it's not about just the end goal, right? It's about all the steps that it takes to make it to that goal. And so whether it's during these protests that One Fair Wage and other restaurant workers were mobilizing alongside and really highlighting the fact that both these things in terms of our protections and in terms of income disparity and, danger is disproportionately affecting people of color. And so it is a life or death issue under COVID. So it's not a matter of necessarily, getting shot down in the street. If you have to go to work for pennies on the dollar and you get COVID and die, that these are both representations of racial disparities, and they have to be addressed together. You can't just parcel this out. Well, we're going to save you in this situation, but you're screwed in this one. That doesn't work, And I think over this last summer, we saw that coming together of narrative, that it's not just about police brutality, it's about systemic racism and how systemic racism and patriarchy is reflected in the actual fabric and how industries in our country run. And that these legacies have to be dismantled. And so I think that concept for a lot of people pre-COVID wasn't analogous. It wasn't something that they saw as intertwined. And what we saw with the rise, of mobilization for racial equity, that it combined with the realities that restaurant workers were experiencing and mobilized them in a different way. And so you also have the opportunity to educate a new populace, because you have a whole bunch of people coming to this rally who are like, okay, we need justice. And then you have representatives from One Fair Wage coming up and saying, yes, we do need justice. This is also another place where we need justice, where they might have had no idea. As Abby said, she didn't know that people were getting paid $2.13 an hour until she was in one of those moments getting to see Saru speak. And I think those moments are becoming more frequent. The message is being amplified more to the general public. And I think the more people actually understand the true context of the situation, the easier it is to leverage those senators. The easier it is to say, actually, you can't erode any more rights. We need to make more rights. Actually, we need to reinforce OSHA protections under COVID, and we need to refine these things so workers are not going to work and putting their lives on the line, because there's no amount of money that is worth my life or worth anybody else's life, honestly.
Thank you
Just
so much
want
for
to
that.
add- Oh,
Yes,
sorry.
no
I
problem.
just want to add to what Chizda's saying. And Chizda, has done that with me, come to events that are more broadly about justice and spoken about One Fair Wage. So she's played that role. But I do also just want to share that organizing, I've never seen such an organizing moment in my 20 years of organizing as now. So I, as you saw in the film, founded and led Rock for 18 years. We maybe got to 30,000 members by the time I left in 2019. When we launched One Fair Wage as a separate entity, it was right before the pandemic. The pandemic hit. We started an emergency fund for service workers, unexpectedly raised like $20 million, and 228,000 workers applied for relief. And so 20 years of organizing, we got to 30,000 workers. One day of setting up an emergency fund, within 2 or 3 months, we had 228,000 workers come to us. And that was a list of contacts and a base that we immediately started organizing. We had like 1,000 volunteers come forward and help us call the workers, not just get them relief, but start moving them up ladders of engagement.
Amazing.
So that by August, we ended up, so what happened was that we started the fund in March. We started having teletown halls, virtual town halls with workers from around the country. I think in total, we calculated about 30,000 workers participated in those town halls, and they were with Kamala Harris and AOC and Governor Whitmer and just lots of amazing people. And then from those teletown halls, we organized online to offline, held a strike vote in August, because in the town halls, we were hearing for the first time in 20 years, I'm not going to go back to work without one fair wage. So we said, that's a strike. People are essentially striking. Let's strike. And so in August, we had our first strike vote. In September, we had our first strike in 2 cities. In October, we had our next strike in 4 or 5 more cities. And the actions have continued since then. So I mean, it's been an incredible moment for organizing. In fact, our next action is on Tuesday. We're doing a pre-inauguration day celebratory action, thanking Biden for endorsing one fair wage, which he ended up doing as a result of all this organizing, but then pushing to make it a reality.
Right. Awesome.
So say one more thing about what's going to happen on Tuesday, because this is the first time hearing of it.
So we're doing events in front of high road restaurants. These are restaurants that support one fair wage in about a dozen cities around the country. And there'll be their own local events with press, but then we're filming it all because the Presidential Inauguration Committee reached out and said, if you submit, you could have a virtual affiliated event with the inauguration.
Oh,
so
good.
We're going to be part of the parade. I think that's a virtual parade, with workers standing in front of restaurants saying, we celebrate today, but we celebrate change and we need one fair wage. And it's going to be the kickoff. There are going to be actions every month going forward.
Great. Wayne has a question. Wayne, you're mute again.
Yeah. So do you have a connection to the new labor commissioner?
Yes. So the other relief program that we created during the pandemic, we created the relief program for workers and then a relief program for employers called High Road Citizens. Kicked it off actually with the other candidate for labor commissioner, Julie Su, in California. And then it grew to 6 or 7 other states. And basically it's a program providing cash grants to restaurants that commit to transitioning to one fair wage and providing 500 free meals to the community. And we did it first with Governor Newsom and Julie Su, and then Mayor de Blasio picked it up, and Mayor Walsh made a big deal about this in Boston, put $500,000 of CARES Act money into it.
Good.
We do have a connection, but if you have a stronger connection, we're always.
No, I don't. I do with some of the other people who were under consideration, but not with him. No.
Yeah, no, he got really excited about this program. So now we are working with the Biden-Harris transition team to make this a federal executive order, because if we can fund restaurants all over the country, provide them with cash grants to transition to one fair wage, that then creates a supportive network of restaurant owners around the country for the federal bill to make sure they don't leave out tipped workers.
Great.
And look, this is a long shot. It's a long shot to try to get tipped workers included in the federal bill, because we have a very tight margin in both the House and the Senate, and it's going to be really hard, but we have to throw our all into it, because this may be the last time in another 10 or 15 years when we can actually try to make sure there's a minimum wage increase that actually includes tipped workers.
Yeah. And another question I have, and this can be for anyone to answer, I felt that, or I believe that one of the greatest arguments in the film was the idea that restaurant owners are being subsidized by the government when it comes to the
customers.
Yeah, and I'm curious to know, and this is for all 3 panels or anyone for that matter, has there been a response to that argument by the Restaurant Association? Like, what have they said about that, if anything, or anyone for that matter, or has this gone unanswered?
Unremarked upon.
Unremarked upon.
I mean, far from commenting on that, they've been demanding since the beginning of the pandemic that they get just unfettered, untethered, unqualified cash, and not just for small businesses, but for the chains. They are demanding, they are crying wolf. They are saying the industry is failing. And for the independent restaurants, we genuinely feel for them. But sadly, so many Democrats are are feeling for the restaurant owners and giving money to the restaurant owners. I mean, when you talk about, in the movie, we talked about the way in which the government's subsidizing these restaurants through public assistance. Forget that. That's indirect. We're talking about direct cash in the form of billions of dollars going out to restaurant owners right now with no qualification, protections, or consideration for workers. And a huge fight over whether tipped workers could even get the minimum wage. Think about that. Right now, they're considering the Restaurants Act, which would provide $120 billion, unqualified money, no restrictions, no qualifications to restaurant owners. And they're having a fit about raising the minimum wage from $2 for workers. It is unbelievable. And I don't just blame the Restaurant Association, I blame Democrats. How can Democrats claim to be the people of the party of the working people and yet give so much money away to capital with nothing to working people? Nothing to working people. And what is disturbing me about this moment in particular is that there has been the insurrectionists, the white supremacists have taken over this moment of change to a new administration and changed the conversation from being, okay, it's a new moment. No more milquetoast, Democrats. We need an agenda that actually delivers for working people. Otherwise, you will not get reelected again. You got elected in Georgia and all of these places because you promised to deliver something. Now deliver it. And instead, the conversation has gone to, oh, you'd be brave if you impeach white supremacists. I'm sorry, but impeaching white supremacists is the bare minimum of what you can do as somebody who claims to care about racial equity. If you really care about racial equity, impeaching white supremacists should have been a yesterday conversation. And now we want to see you deliver for the people of color who delivered for you in Arizona and Georgia and Michigan and Pennsylvania, who earn $2 and $3 an hour.
Thank you, Saru. Anyone else? Abby, Chiesa?
Well, I would say a little bit as an outsider, again, I was sort of observing and documenting and, recording for history some of what I was seeing. I think I went into this without having as good an appreciation as I do now about the power of the NRA. I mean, we say it in the film, but what Saru is talking about is, you're trying to scream over the megaphones of people who have been piling dollars into the pockets of largely Republican senators. Yes, there are some Democrats who haven't done the job here, but part of the reason I think that the NRA is so entrenched is that they have been at the job of owning our elected representatives, both in the state houses and in Washington, for a very long time. And so the level of both visibility and support and information, you have to rise above a din that is essentially being constantly recreated by the NRA about we are so, that's how they got to the Restaurants Act. Right. They're well organized. They know how to cry, we're in pain, in the middle of the pandemic, louder and in a more organized way than almost anybody else. So that's how come we have something called the Restaurants Act. We don't have a Car Manufacturers Act. We don't have an act in the name of anybody else at this point. So I just want to say that this is not only David versus Goliath, but we need to understand the Goliath and the I don't know, the amount of power that Goliath has managed to amass over many, many years and after stuffing many dollars in many people's pockets. So, it is amazing in many ways that the voices around One Fair Wage have been as loud and has been heard as well as they have been. So there is reason to be optimistic, but you have to really understand who your enemy is in order to be able to make a dent in all of this. And I think, let me just say one other thing, which is I'm so glad, Edgar, that you found us and that you found this film. And, we've been talking for 9 months or something about trying to do something. Because, you're tied into a different kind of progressive group than we are. And I'm really, anything we can do to kind of work together and to bring some of the connections you guys have into the work that's being done here is really important. And so I just want to thank you again for understanding that this is an issue you care about as well from all the other issues you care about at workplace fairness.
Absolutely. Thank you. Thank you so much for that. And Chiesa, let me ask this question to you, unless you have something to say about what we're just talking about.
I do. I can keep it brief though. I just wanted to say that part of the leverage has been this narratives that small businesses are in danger, which they are. But the Restaurant Association represents by and large chains, not small restaurants.
Right.
So they are exploiting this narrative of these small endangered restaurants that are not going to be able to exist. Meanwhile, shelling out all the big, we saw the controversy with the PPP loans about who was actually getting the money. And it wasn't saving these small businesses, it was saving the profits for larger corporations and chains. And what we've actually seen in terms of increasing minimum wage, in terms of tips and in terms of profits, is that it's actually the opposite of what most people think. That you think, oh no, if you raise the minimum wage, that means my expenses are going to be X amount more, which means, and people are going to buy less, right? So how is a business going to survive? And I actually was working as a restaurant manager in Oakland when they passed the slow graduated rise to $15 an hour. And the first jump was, I think, $1.25, right? So minimum wage had jumped to $1.25. And we're like, okay, well, we can work this out. We can eke a couple different things. The next jump happened. And we said, okay, well, how are we going to work this out? So cocktails went up $1. You know what happened? Nobody drank less. And so our servers were making more money in tips because the checks were higher.
Right.
The business had record profits quarter after quarter after quarter. They didn't even know it was possible to have that level of profit in the restaurant that they had. And so this restaurant, now they had opened, 2 new ones since I had worked there years ago. And part of that was a credit to increasing the minimum wage, and the changes that they needed to do in terms of working it out benefited everybody involved. It benefited the workers, it benefited the restaurant, and it benefited the guest.
Mm-hmm.
That's right. And
Yeah.
even the truth is the NRA does represent the chains. She has this so right. That's really who's behind it. But even if they did represent small business, there's no way for small business in this country to survive without people who can consume in small businesses.
Right.
And there's no way to kill your consumption base and think that small business is going to do well. You
Right.
know, I don't understand how come nobody can remember Henry Ford, who was a racist and a Nazi, but also knew that he had to pay his workers $5 a day, excuse me, at the time, so that the workers in his factories could afford the cars coming off the assembly line. Basic capitalist economics. We have gone to such an extreme that this industry is actually cannibalizing itself. We are seeing casual restaurants like Olive Garden and Applebee's stagnate in terms of their quarterly profits because there isn't a middle class or a working class anymore the way that there used to be, because this industry is the largest industry that has had stagnated wages for 30 years. They are killing their own consumer base. That's why the states that have one fair wage have faster job growth. The chains are growing faster. Small businesses are growing faster because the consumer base is stronger. And our consumer base coming out of this pandemic, I don't think they understand, has been decimated. It is devastated. Who's going to eat at your restaurant when you see the kinds of lines you see in front of food banks?
Right.
Who's going to eat at your restaurant when people are being evicted in the masses? Where are they living? You think they're going to eat out? They're not. And so, yes, you're going to have your fine dining clientele and fast food, but that middle tier has stagnated, and it's because the industry has killed its own consumer base. And so even for small businesses, raising wages is imperative if they want to survive.
Thank you for that, everyone. And one final question, unless there are other people who have questions for the panelists. So we talked a lot about intersectionality in terms of what the sub-minimum wage means in terms of the way it affects women of color, especially. And so we can imagine a world, hopefully, that the sub-minimum wage would be no more. But could you identify or talk about for people who are we listen to this recording, other parts, other areas that need to be improved in the restaurant industry that are closely related to minimum wage? That will be the next frontier for organizing for restaurant workers.
You're saying other sub-minimum wage sectors.
Or other issues related to minimum wage. Because again, we talked about the intersectionality of how the minimum wage affects women of color, especially, and the intersectionality of it. So is the next phase then addressing, for example, gender discrimination and the unfairness of the restaurant industry towards women? Is that the next frontier, or is it something else? I think
I'm so glad you asked that, because for us, the next frontier is ending all sub-minimum wages in the U.S.
Okay.
For all workers across the board. So it's not, we're
Exactly.
not just dealing with the restaurant industry.
So tipped restaurant workers are not even the only tipped workers who get a sub-minimum wage. There are nail salon workers and car wash workers, parking attendants, airport wheelchair attendants, all of whom get a sub-minimum wage because they are tipped. But even beyond tipped workers, workers with disabilities get a sub-minimum wage. Youth get a sub-minimum wage in many states. Gig workers get a sub-minimum wage, especially post Prop 22 in California. And I think maybe most outrageously, incarcerated workers get a sub-minimum wage because of the exception to the 13th Amendment that allows for slavery and involuntary servitude in the case of incarceration. And so we have expanded our fight for one fair wage to say nobody in the United States of America should earn less than the minimum wage. After all, that was the notion of a minimum wage. It's supposed to be the minimum. Nobody gets less than it. And incarcerated workers, this issue has particularly come up in the last year and a half. In fire, the fires that we've had in California have been fought. 1/3 of our firefighting workforce in California has been incarcerated workers earning 11 cents an hour. And this insurrection we just saw in the Capitol destroyed furniture in the Capitol, all of which is built by federal prisoners earning less than 50 cents an hour. All of that furniture that was destroyed by white supremacists will have to be replaced or repaired by federal prisoners earning less than 50 cents an hour. And if you think about all of these different sub-minimum wage workers, tipped workers are mostly women, disproportionately women of color. Incarcerated workers are Black and brown. Youth are young. Workers with disabilities are disabled. Yeah. In each of these categories, we are literally valuing people as less than human by giving them a sub-minimum wage. It is a value of their worth for giving them a sub-minimum wage. And so if we as a country have finally gotten to the place where we believe that all human beings are equal, then we have to actually pay everybody a full minimum wage. And that is the next frontier.
That's amazing.
On the gender and race issue, we've already been working on that. Right. We actually, for the attorneys, we just filed a really creative, we've got creative litigation going on that basically claims that the mere existence of a sub-minimum wage in these companies is in and of itself a violation of equal protection because of now the overwhelming, irrefutable evidence that tips are biased. That workers of color earn less in tips than white workers, that women earn less unless they're willing to be harassed. Right. And so we worked with some attorneys from Harvard and around the country to file EEOC charges and now litigation against Darden, Olive Garden's parent company, on this idea that it is a in and of itself, on its face, a violation of equal protection to have a sub-minimum wage, because it forces people to live off of tips, which are inherently biased.
Yeah, and I think the common theme that that I hear from your answer is that fighting for a fair wage is a human rights issue, right?
Yes.
And how we see our fellow person, which is very important, particularly this day and age. So thank you for sharing that.
Can I just say one other thing? I mean, which just sort of relates to this.
Please, Abby.
Okay, so the fact that people are shocked when they, again, I made the film because I was shocked. And so the thousands of people, who are like, wait a minute, You mean the waitress or the waiter who is serving me is not getting paid a minimum wage? It's like the fact that people do not know that this exists, is part of how come it's been in place for so many years.
Right.
I mean, it's literally the 213 has been in place, since 1991. And
Yeah.
before that, it was even less than 213. So there is something about the collective ignorance that we all operate with. And I say that including myself, absolutely, that means that some of these enormous inequities are permitted to go forward because we don't even know the problem exists.
Yeah.
And
And
that's big, you know what I mean? And so we all as citizens have some kind of an obligation, to inform our fellow citizens about how deep this inequity is and for how many years it has been in place and how it is a legacy of slavery. And it is like time to get rid of it. So
yeah,
just want to say that.
and a conduit to a shared success moving forward, because more people with more money in their pockets means that there's less people on food lines, less
Right.
people having to worry about childcare. I mean, the overall impacts this could have in a positive way are huge if people can see that it's a shared success, and that's always the issue with these things, that people believe that, well, if I give this person something, well, what do I get in return, or I lose something, and that's always, I feel like, the common barrier to this type of progress. So hopefully we can get past that, and I hope people see that, particularly with COVID, you're one paycheck away from the food line, and whether you're a restaurant worker or even someone who does make, a fairly good wage, right, or salary, you can be one paycheck away from that, so I think it's people seeing the shared success and the shared commitment to, humanity,
Yeah.
So, all right, any
Amen to that.
yes. So any other questions before we close the Q&A, or any comments or thoughts? All right. Well, I want to thank Abby, Saru, and Chienza for joining us today. Really, thank you so much for making the film, being part of it, and being part of this phenomenal movement. And I certainly hope that our organization can support One Fair Wage and all that's happening out there to ensure that we hopefully have a brighter future in this, whether it's for restaurant workers and for anyone making the sub-minimum wage. So I look forward to further collaborations.
We gotta join up on the barricades here, because this is not, as we can see, this is not going to happen without a lot of pressure from below.
Yes.
Biden is going to have a list of 20 pages of things that people want him to do. And there's something so fundamental about, dealing with the minimum wage and getting rid of the tip minimum wage that maybe we can push ourselves to a little higher number on the list. But we're going to need your help getting the word out, telling people who they need to write to. You know what I mean? This is like going to be an important collaboration between us as we move forward.
Yes, during the course of the conversation, I have many ideas, and Jamie will hear most of them soon enough through an email.
Sure I will.
But stay in touch with us, because this is
don't worry.
We're into a different group than we are, and it would be really good to collaborate moving forward. Because it's going to be all hands on deck.
Yes.
I just want to point out, I think we have a question.
Oh.
Eve.
Hey guys, this is Eve here. I just want to thank everyone involved, from Abby to Saru, for the great work on that documentary. You guys are legitimately awesome.
Oh, thanks.
I always pride myself on being, fully aware of what's going on. So a couple of weeks ago, I was on my way somewhere and I had YouTube playing in the background in the car. And it was about like women's rights and the same topic that we're discussing right now, tips and minimum wage. And then I called Jamie and I said, babe, do you know that
That's my husband, guys.
The whole tipping system, where it came from, and she forwarded me this video, and I was just literally amazed. And even listening to this panel today, like, it's deeper than just restaurant workers. It's people who are incarcerated and airport workers. I did not know that. But continue to do a good job and continue to spread that awareness, because I'm pretty sure there's a lot of people like me who don't know about this topic in the details of it. It's so it's deeper than I could have ever even imagined. Just thank you guys, and just continue to spread the word and the good work.
Thank
Thank
you.
you for
Thank
that.
you so much. Yes.
Thank you.
Uh,
Thank you.
So to close, I want to just do a couple of thank yous. I want to thank the WF staff, particularly Jamie, for helping to put this together. So thank you so much, Jamie, and Carol, who cannot be here today, but thank you so much to both of them. And I want to thank our board members who are on this call today, Wayne Outen, who again is the chair of the Workplace Fairness Board and they're one of the original co-founders, and Barry Sang for being on today as well, one of our newer board members. And Grant Thompson, who is not a board member, but he's a board member confidant. So we treat him as a board member. So thank you, Grant, for being on this call today. Also, again, thank you to our wonderful panelists and give us the opportunity to do the virtual screening through our platforms. I'm very grateful for that. And again, I do look forward to hopefully working together more to bring to the forefront the plight of low-wage workers, particularly those who are making the sub-minimum wage. And hopefully that term will be a term of the past in the next 4 years or less. And also, I just encourage anyone listening to this recording, if you have not had a chance to watch the film, please find a way to do so. We'll try to make that information accessible to you on our website at www.workplacefairness.org. You can also visit the Waging Change website as well to get more information about viewing the film and also One Fair Wage. And I also want to encourage everyone, to please support these organizations. Workplace Fairness, One Fair Wage, and even Abby can use your support.
Abby definitely can use your.
And getting the film out there and for more virtual screenings, to support One Fair Wage's ongoing efforts and to also support our organization, Workplace Fairness, in our efforts to educate the public. So thank you so much again for joining us this evening, and see you soon.
Thank you for having us.
everybody.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Take care.
Thank you.
Bye.